Something is going terribly wrong in Crimea. Putin had promised Crimea stability and prosperity. But in 2025, Crimeans are stealing gasoline from each other. For over 2 million citizens of Crimea, more than half of the gas stations are completely out of gas. Now residents wait for hours, sometimes even days, in front of gas stations with rusty cans. Despite this, they often have to return home without fuel, filled with anger and helplessness. Images circulating on social media from tourist cities like Yalta show people taking to the streets at night to steal gasoline from each other's cars. This is a scene worse than the collapse of the Soviet Union. A country that claims to be a superpower and even an oil giant is now facing the collapse of social order over a basic necessity: gasoline. And people are forced to steal at night to survive. This is the starkest manifestation of the misery brought by war. Now every Crimean with a car must devote a significant part of their day to a desperate hunt for fuel. But at the few stations where gasoline can be found, prices have climbed to 80 rubles. This is an exorbitant price for the vast majority of people living on the minimum wage. Left with no other option, the Kremlin has dusted off a ration card system from the Soviet era. It has implemented a distribution model limited to 20 liters per person. However, these temporary band-aid solutions are deepening the crisis rather than calming it and fueling public anger. Drivers have set up special groups on platforms such as Telegram and WhatsApp to communicate with each other. In these groups, whispers such as, "A tanker has pulled up at such and such a station," or "They're giving out 20 liters with ration cards here," spread instantly. Hundreds of vehicles immediately rush to these locations in a panic. However, most of the time, this rush ends with empty pumps and cardboard signs reading, "No gasoline." Some desperate drivers risk traveling hundreds of kilometers to neighboring regions in the hope of finding cheaper and perhaps available fuel. However, this often serves no purpose other than consuming the last of the fuel in the tank. The collapse of public transportation is also among the effects. With private vehicles out of commission, the entire burden has fallen on the public transportation system. But this system is also taking its share of the crisis. City minibuses are packed to the brim, unable to take on more passengers. Taxis either demand exorbitant prices or cannot operate due to lack of fuel. People wait for hours at stops to get to work, hospitals, or schools. Modern city life has given way to a 19th century logistical nightmare. We can also say that the economy has come to a standstill. This crisis is hitting not only individuals, but the entire economy. According to a local activist speaking to Medusa, with the start of the harvest season, the agricultural sector is at risk of coming to a complete halt. Tractors, harvesters, pickup trucks carrying workers to the fields. All of them depend on diesel. No fuel means no harvest. This is also a harbinger of a food crisis in the near future. Private companies are suffering serious losses because they cannot distribute their products or bring their employees to work. Only state institutions and military vehicles can operate with the special fuel coupons allocated to them, further fueling public anger. To understand the scale of the crisis, the first place to look is the data published by Russia's respected business newspaper Kommersant. According to this report, which monitors 17,000 gas stations, exactly 50% of stations in Crimea and Sevastopol have completely stopped selling gasoline. This is not an estimate, but a finding. 1 in every 2 stations on the peninsula has locked its doors or sealed its pumps. This is no longer just a fuel shortage, it is the collapse of social order. This collapse is not due to the Kremlin's arrogant dreams about the Black Sea or its distorted budget choices. It is due to the complete failure of the peninsula's fuel artery. This is because all of Crimea's fuel needs are brought in from mainland Russia via the Kerch Bridge or by risky sea routes. This fuel is stored in massive oil and fuel storage terminals at various points on the peninsula. These terminals are the lifeblood of both civilian life in Crimea and the occupying force of more than 60,000 soldiers. For the past year, Ukraine has been conducting a relentless operation to sever these arteries one by one. This campaign had 2 main targets. The first was the massive marine fuel depot in Sevastopol, the heart of the Black Sea Fleet. The second was the oil terminal in Feodosia, through which a large portion of the peninsula's civilian fuel needs entered. These 2 centers were essentially Crimea's lungs. However, Ukraine repeatedly targeted these lungs, rendering them unable to breathe. Looking at what is happening in Crimea today is more than enough to see the impact of these attacks. And this is just the beginning. The crisis is not limited to Crimea, it is spreading like cancer throughout the entire South Russia region. It is reported that more than 220 stations, or 14.2% of the total, have suspended sales in Russia's southern federal district, which includes Crimea. According to Ukraine's National Resistance Center, the situation is worst in Crimea. The opposition telegram channel, Crimean Wind, goes even further, reporting that gasoline has completely run out in Sevastopol, the peninsula's largest city. According to this channel, when news spread that 2 fuel tankers had arrived at a station, queues stretching for miles immediately formed, and all the fuel arrived was depleted within a few hours. This is not a shortage, it is a desertification. The occupation administration in Crimea, however, is trying to present a different picture. Sergei Aksionov, head of the occupying administration, initially described the situation as logistical difficulties and warned the public not to create artificial demand. However, as the crisis rapidly deepened, he was forced to admit that the problem actually stemmed from a drop in production at Russian refineries. Despite this, he did not mention the Ukrainian attacks on the refineries with a single word. Aksionov's promises to the public that AI-95 will arrive in 2 days, AI-92 in 2 weeks, were not fulfilled. This failure severely undermined the already shaken public's trust in the government. The Soviet-style rationing system, implemented on September 29, 2025, completely destroyed the public's already weakened trust in the government and made the scale of the crisis most visible. This system led to the emergence of a massive black market. People who did not use their 20-litre gasoline allowance, or who needed less, began selling their coupons on the black market for 5 or even 10 times the official price. Gasoline was no longer an energy source, but the most valuable currency. This situation opened a new door to enrichment for corrupt local officials, gas station owners, and organized crime groups. Ordinary citizens were forced to choose between paying these exorbitant prices or going without fuel. The long queues at gas stations in Crimea and the chaos experienced by the public are merely the civilian reflection of a much larger and more deadly collapse. This crisis reveals how fragile the logistics dream of Crimea, marketed by Putin as his impregnable southern fortress, really is, and how Ukraine has turned that dream into a nightmare. Wars are won not only with bullets, but also with fuel. And right now, the Russian occupation force of more than 60,000 soldiers in Crimea is literally suffocating from lack of fuel. To understand the anatomy of this military disaster, one must look at the geographical and logistical reality of Crimea. The peninsula's entire fuel supply depends on a single lifeline from mainland Russia, the Kerch Bridge, which is constantly under threat from Ukraine, or risky sea shipments. The fuel reaching Crimea was stored in massive oil and fuel storage terminals located in centers such as Sevastopol and Feodosia, scattered across different points on the peninsula. These terminals were the lifelines that sustained not only civilian life, but also tanks, ships, warplanes, and tens of thousands of soldiers. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky's campaign, dubbed Deep Strike, is precisely such a surgical operation aimed at severing these lifelines. The targeting of 85 high-value targets over the past 2 months, including 33 military facilities and 52 military-industrial facilities on Russian territory, is proof of how systematic this strategy is. By repeatedly striking these massive fuel depots, which are the lungs of Crimea, Ukraine has blocked the peninsula's airways. Even if fuel were to arrive via the Kerch Bridge, there are no longer any secure, large-capacity centers to store and distribute it. The repercussions of this situation on the front lines spell utter devastation for the Russian army. As Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Syrsky noted, this fuel crisis is a more effective weapon than bullets. A T-90 tank on the front line is $1 million pile of metal without the diesel to move it. It stops the truck carrying the cannon that fires the bullets to the front line, the armored vehicle protecting that truck, and the generator of the command center managing the entire operation. Warplanes and helicopters cannot take off from their bases without a constant flow of fuel. Ukraine is simply neutralizing expensive Russian military equipment by depriving it of the cheap fuel that feeds it. This is the complete drying up of the Russian army's forward operating capability. Moreover, this situation is not limited to the Crimean Peninsula. It is rapidly spreading throughout the Russian Federation. From Smolensk to Primoria, from Saratov to St. Petersburg, and even Moscow, a fuel crisis has erupted in more than 20 Russian oblasts. While drivers across Russia struggle with long lines and rising prices, the Kremlin has found a solution in banning gasoline exports until 2026. Even Russia's attempt to make emergency fuel shipments from Belarus ended in disaster when a train caught fire and was destroyed in Smolensk. Now, no outside help is coming either. Across Russia, 2.6% of all gas stations have completely run out of fuel. At first glance, 2.6% may seem like a low percentage. However, the key point to note is that this figure is growing rapidly every day, and that Russia has the largest geography in the world. In other words, a 2.6% rate could mean more than the total gasoline needs of many European countries. The Kremlin made a desperate move to extinguish the fire in the domestic market. Gasoline and diesel exports were banned. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak announced that the gasoline export ban would be extended until the end of the year, and that partial restrictions would also be imposed on diesel exports. This decision is a concrete result of Putin's guns or bread dilemma and is causing him to lose on both fronts. Russia is one of the world's largest diesel exporters. Fuel exports were one of the most important sources of foreign currency financing the war machine. This ban is expected to pull approximately 2.4 million tons of fuel from global markets in the fourth quarter. This means a hole of billions of dollars in the Kremlin's budget. By August 2025, Russia's fossil fuel export revenues had already declined for the third consecutive month. With this ban, a sharp decline in revenues is inevitable. Russia's move has created a shockwave in global energy markets. Brent oil prices recorded their largest weekly gain since June. Countries heavily dependent on Russian diesel, such as Turkey, will be forced to seek alternative suppliers, which could cause prices to rise by up to 10%. Russia is also destroying its reputation as a reliable energy supplier. Beyond the military and economic effects, Vladimir Putin is also being shaken by a symbolic blow. For Putin, Crimea was not just a piece of annexed land. It was the strongest symbol of Russian power, prestige, and the narrative of reunification with the motherland. The Kremlin had promised to turn the peninsula into an impregnable fortress, the unshakable southern outpost of the Russian world. Today, that fortress is crumbling from within. The Kremlin cannot even fulfill its most basic state function, providing fuel to its citizens. The Crimean people, liberated with grand promises in 2014, now cannot drive their cars, go to work, or plow their fields due to the incompetence of the Russian administration. This situation tears up the tacit social contract Putin made with the Russian people. Give me political loyalty, and I will provide you with stability and prosperity. There is neither stability nor prosperity left in Crimea. There is only panic and chaos. This is proof of how successful Ukraine's strategy of logistically strangling Crimea and completely cutting it off from Russia has been. Combined with the fuel crisis and constant threats to the Kerch Bridge, the peninsula is slowly turning into an uninhabitable island. Putin's prestige project is stuck in a quagmire, and this failure is being watched by all of Russia. For years, the Kremlin has built a massive wall of propaganda to keep the war away from the daily lives of the Russian people. The war was presented on television screens as a special military operation, taking place in the distant lands of Ukraine. However, empty gas stations are the biggest crack in this wall of propaganda. Ordinary Russian citizens are now paying the price of the war, not only with their taxes, but also with concrete difficulties in their daily lives. A driver in Moscow or St. Petersburg, a farmer in Crimea, a truck driver in Siberia, they all face the same problem. This situation inevitably raises the question: if the state cannot put gas in its own citizens' cars, what is this war for? This is the most dangerous question for the Kremlin, because this question directly affects the morale of soldiers on the front lines. A soldier who hears that his family cannot find fuel at home and cannot meet their basic needs will inevitably lose his motivation to fight. Ukraine is bombing not only Russian refineries, but also the Russian people's tacit support for the war. The war is now being lost not only on the front lines, but also on the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg, in the lines at gas stations. The dominoes have started to fall. The Kremlin's biggest promise, stability, has evaporated at those empty gas pumps. Putin's Crimean fortress has collapsed from lack of fuel, and beneath the rubble of that fortress lies not just an annexation project, but the future of the entire Russian war machine. The engine has stopped, the fuel is gone, the game is over. If what is described in this video makes you think, it's not just fuel that's running out, but hope too. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Your opinions are important to us. See you in the next videos. Take care.